the story goes he was on a bus in the south of France, and the sun was setting behind a stand of trees, and that meant there was this flickering light effect coming through the bus, and he was dozing off with his eyes closed, and he suddenly started having these dramatic visual experiences of vivid colors and shapes and movement. And when the light stopped flickering, the experiences stopped. And so he built a system to try and recreate this experience. Very low tech, a bright bulb in a rotating cardboard cylinder with slits cut in it. That was the first dream machine. People would sit around it with their eyes closed, and they would have these powerful hallucinations. And it kind of got forgotten about for subsequent decades. And 10 years ago in my lab, we started working on something similar. I'd never heard of Geisen or the Dream Machine before, but we were looking at stroboscopic light and its effects on consciousness. And then I was contacted by a woman called Jen Crook, who told me about Geisen's Dream Machine and brought me into this project where basically, long story short, we ended up building collective dream machines that could take 30 people at a time, with multi-channel sound systems and a score composed by the musician John Hopkins, who's this like pioneer of electronic music. And so groups of 30 people would go in, not really knowing what to expect. We tell them, it'll be a nice thing. You'll lie down in a sort of nice reclining seat and we'll flash lights at you. And people have these pretty incredible experiences, everyone different. But most of them have these experiences of colors they've never seen before, colors that seem to go around the back of their heads, being very immersed in these hallucinations. And you really experience them, not that you're looking at something, but you kind of experience that you are generating these experiences in some way.
Some perceptive differences and people in general, and how important that is to, really this idea that everyone to some degree is having a very unique experience and yeah, sort of what your studies have shown regarding that.
Yeah, I think this is something that I'm currently really quite excited about. And it came out of this Dream Machine project as well, which was this big collaboration with artists and musicians and architects and so on. And in this Dream Machine, it was very apparent that everyone's going through the same situation, the same flashing light sequence. But of course, we all have different brains, and we all bring our different selves to each day. And so no surprise, really, that people would have different experiences, but they were really quite different. Some people would just see a few colors. Other people would have these whole narrative scenes unfolding, dreamlike sequences and so on.
Wow.
And in psychology and neuroscience, there's been some attention paid to this idea that we all differ on the inside, just as we differ on the outside. I mean, we have this whole concept of neurodiversity, which emphasizes that we all differ. But that idea of neurodiversity has tended to become associated with particular conditions like autism or ADHD, and ironically reinforces the common view that if you're not neurodivergent, then you're neurotypical and you see things and experience things as they are, because that's what it feels like. Again, when we open our eyes, it feels like our eyes and our ears are just transparent windows onto the world as it really is. But that's not the case. Colors, again, are constructed by our brains in collaboration with the world. And we have different brains. We're going to have different color experiences. There was that remember that photo of the dress that half the world saw?
Right.
Yeah. So that was great because that suddenly cut through. So people just, it wasn't that people saw different things. What really amazed me there was the conviction with which people who saw it one way had about their way, and the others, well, they're just nuts. They can't be right.
Right.
So that for me is really revealing about this naive realism we have with respect to our experiences. We just take them to be real.
Yeah.
And so we've been looking into this much more. It's not the first people to do this, but we had a big study called the Perception Census, which reached again around 35,000 people across the world. They all did a bunch of simple experiments and illusions and things like that. And we have been collecting this, hopefully what will be a kind of landmark data set to try and understand how different our experiences are. Within this so-called normal neurotypical range, where it's too easy to assume we have the same experience because we'll use the same words and we'll behave the same way. And so this is scientifically interesting, but I think it's it's relevant for these bigger questions about how we live our lives, because it can cultivate a bit of humility about our own way of seeing.
Yeah.
If we realize that something as simple as when we open our eyes and look at what's in front of us, if that's something that is not identical to how things are, but is partly how we are, the novelist Anil Seth said, we do not see things as they are. We see them as we are.
Yeah.
And if we can really bake this in by showing it, really showing it, using data in this case is a really powerful tool to just show, no, everyone is different, really. And you're here, and you're here, and you're here. Then I think that has the potential to make us all a little bit more humble about our own ways of seeing. And of course, then, the larger, the more optimistic, idealistic view is we can cultivate a similar humility to what we believe, what we think, and begin to counteract some of these dynamics of polarization that are becoming so problematic in many areas of the world now.
100%. Yeah, it definitely fosters more empathy and understanding and open-mindedness, which I think we can use as much of that as we possibly can get on this planet right now. And what I love about it is, as I relate it to my own perspectives on the ultimate nature of reality, this idea for me, we're one with the source consciousness that creates and animates all things. I am it. It is me. The separation between you and I is actually an elaborate illusion. The consciousness that animates my form is the consciousness that animates your form, I believe. And I'm literally talking to an extension of self. And this is how source, God, the universe, higher self experiences itself throughout eternity. That's, my belief regarding it. And if I had to sum it up, and
I can buy into part of that, and it may be surprising, but I think there is a sense in which what it is to be me is literally in the minds of other people. Part of what it feels like to be me is my perception of how other people perceive me.
Right.
And that depends on what's in other people's brains. Yeah. So there's, we haven't met until this conversation, but, we're changing all the time. Yep. And now part of what it is to be me, is also part of you.
Right.
Because we've now, interacted in this this brief Zoom conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think there's, these views are our views are not necessarily as opposed as one might think if you just focus on the metaphysical, like does consciousness, exist in a separate realm beyond life and death, or not? I think this is what I find remarkable, is that you often get to quite a similar place.
Yeah. And what I love about this idea of different perspectives, it's like, I like the saying, there's only one truth, your truth. Like, if we are fractals of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things, and if I believe and perceive in a certain way, and I'm the creator and created rolled into one, then I am creating my reality in a way that it's a feedback loop reflecting me back to me. And so it's like I continue to get evidence to support my perspective. You continue to get evidence to support yours, because we are creating it at some fundamental level. It's like Henry Ford, whether you think you can or think you can't.
Yeah.
Right?
And there's a concept, that I work with in my area called active inference, which is this idea that in my view, the brain is always making predictions about what's out there and using sensory data to update the predictions, and the predictions are what we experience. That's this creative, generative aspect of the brain. Right. But we don't just passively absorb data. If my brain is trying to is predicting something to be the case, it can make different actions to create that data in a self-fulfilling way. So you have this dynamic of self-reinforcement, which can affect our experiences. So we will get canalized, entrenched into different directions. I should also say that it's not like none of this, and I guess in your view too, none of this spirals off into complete relativism, right? Because some people might say, well, if my way of seeing is just my way and your way is your way, then like how do these relate to what's actually there?
Right.
Then
relative truth is how I refer to it.
You can believe in anything, right? And that that can be just as problematic as the obverse, right? But of course, that's not true either. That in perception, even though most of us will have somewhat different experiences, there'll be a great deal of overlap. If we're standing by the side of the road and waiting to cross the road, unless we've got serious problems with our eyes or our visual brain, we'll see that truck that's approaching, and we won't cross the road, because evolution has made damn sure that our perceptual systems, even though they don't reveal the world as it is, they reveal the world in ways that is generally useful for our staying
we
alive.
might see the truck in different colors, right?
Exactly.
The
Exactly.
grass and I'm the blue.
Yeah.
I what you just touched on, I refer to as like relative truths, like this idea, of course, as I touched on, that we're one. I can make an argument and state my belief as to why I think that is true. Yet you and I are separate. Certainly we can make that case, and both are true depending on the vantage point, I believe, from whence we're speaking, and perceiving. So I think in all truth there's some bit of untruth, and it's like these different layers of it is really interesting to consider as well.
Yes, no, that is interesting. I mean, I think for me it's the kind of incremental and self-challenging nature of science that sort of works for me as a way to ground beliefs, because you can come up with beliefs that seemingly so weird and counterintuitive. Again, in physics, things like relativity or quantum mechanics just seem totally bizarre, but nonetheless they make incredibly precise and useful predictions. And for me, that's absolutely fascinating when you have a method, a way of thinking that's sort of spread out beyond the individual and becomes this historically productive. Not always, right? I mean, science has got bad sides as well. You can get people, because it's not, I mean, there's this myth, I think, that science is purely objective. You just turn the wheel and out come facts, and it's anything but. It's subject to the same human predilections, biases, jealousies, funding. I mean, there's human factors too, in terms of people publish papers to get jobs, and so and so they're motivated to maybe over-egg results in some way, and there's plenty of ways in which science falls short of this ideal as a system for generating increasingly objective truths. But nonetheless, I think it's the best system we've got. It's like, was it Churchill saying about democracy? It's like the I always mess this quote up, but it's like the worst form of government apart from all the other ones. Something like that. It's the best of a bad job.
Right. Exactly. Well, I'd love to, as we start to wind down here, switch to a bit of story time. As we touched on, I love to hear stories of synchronicity, serendipity. You're probably not going to have a positive paranormal story, but any kind of inspiring story. I'd love to.
I think I'm going to disappoint you here by almost the opposite, but I find it inspiring in my own way, and it's certainly not a positively paranormal story, but it's actually the story that I open my book by. So I have this book called Being You, about consciousness, and the way I decided to open it was with this story about general anesthesia. And I've had 4 episodes of general anesthesia for various things now, and it's remarkable, and I found it very spiritually enriching in a strange way. Now, in general anesthesia, when it's deep enough, you're gone. It's oblivion. I didn't hear people outside the operating theater chatting. I was just gone, and I was gone in a way that's very different from sleep. When you fall asleep, even if it's a very deep sleep, when you wake up, you're kind of aware roughly of how much time has passed. It could have maybe mistaken. It might have been 6 hours instead of 8, or 8 instead of 6. But it wasn't 50 years, and it wasn't 5 minutes. But under anesthesia, it could have been either. You're just not there. You're gone, and then you're back, and no time seems to have passed. You become an object, and then you become conscious again. It's an amazing thing that we can do this. Thank God we live in.
I just had it done for the first time,
oh, really?
Ago. Yeah.
A month ago.
Yeah, I just had my first experience.
And I mean, it's a strange question, but did you enjoy it?
It wasn't. Maybe a little bit. I haven't even thought of it, but it was kind of like, oh wow, this is,
I mean, you don't enjoy the it because there is no it, right? But you can.
I did not enjoy it. Like it wasn't a negative experience, and all in all, I guess I think of the whole thing as positive because, there was no, it was going in for, a colonoscopy, which I've heard can be not good or whatever, but you need to do it at this, the age you're
Yep.
getting to. And, your
Yep.
grandfather died of this, a different
Right.
grandfather. So, and it was like, oh, that was a big nothing,
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because the question, did you enjoy it? It's a little bit of a cheeky question because, of course, during the anesthesia, you're not having any experiences.
Right.
So,
Right.
but
Yeah,
that's kind of the point.
broad experience. Yeah.
That when I reflect on it afterwards, it's really the absence of any kind of experience that for me is this source of, that I keep coming back to. It's the kind of oblivion that I think must be similar to before we are born, and is probably similar to after we die. And it's a difficult thing to grasp, to wrap our heads around, wrap our minds around. And we can't, I haven't done 10,000 hours of meditation, but I find it almost impossible to conceive of not being conscious, because to have that thought is to be conscious.
Yeah.
Yet general anesthesia doesn't care about what I think. It just like, whoop, you're out and you're back. So I know it happens. Consciousness can go away and then come back, and this happens probably hundreds of thousands of times every day.
In a way that I can put a ball in a box and it's still there, but you're not seeing it because there's something blocking it.
Yeah, maybe, but certainly it's me as a subjective individual is not there during anesthesia. And this could be very scary, but I think it can also be very reassuring if you meditate on it a little bit. Think about it, just reflect about it. Because
better than nothing, spending eternity in hell.
Well, exactly. There's nothing to be afraid of. So there's a quote that I nicked, and with credit, from a book by Julian Barnes. The title of his book he's a novelist. The title of his book is Nothing to be Frightened of. And he uses that title because it has this double meaning. We can be terrified of oblivion, but in the end, there's really nothing to be frightened of at all.
Yeah.